just one big story, isn't it?
Hi everybody, welcome to the Story Connection. I'm your host, Donna Wilberg. Tonight we are happy to have a young adult author who is debuting her first novel, The Crow's Rest. Her name is Angelica R. Jackson. You're going to be hearing a lot about her, so welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great opportunity to see you outside of our writers group.
Yes, and I'm so thrilled for you because it's been a labor of love, and to finally make it to that point where you have a book in your hand and now you can actually show the world all the work that you've been doing is wonderful.
Yes, most of the stuff that we went over with the writers group was actually the first book I wrote. This is the second book I wrote, but the first one that sold. And yes, you learned so much from even just writing that first book. So I skipped a few steps, hopefully, with the second one, and this one comes out a lot smoother, more concise.
Well, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? Because as an author, you know, you're going to be putting yourself out there as well besides your work. So.
Well, I actually started maybe about 10 years ago as a professional storyteller, and that's actually where I was exposed to a lot of the mythology that ends up coming into Crow's Rest, because you have to read probably about 50 stories before you find some material that's suitable for you to perform. Mm-hmm. And so I read a lot of different mythologies from around the world. Celtic mythology is what I ended up using for this book, so it was a great way to tie into that. I also wanted to specifically bring in a lot of local things into the book. So some of the setting, the town of Crow's Rest is a made-up town, but it's amalgam of like Placerville, Ione, Nevada City, things like that. So it has a lot of features from a lot of things that locals will recognize, and then it also has a lot of the small town things that will be more universal, I think, to people that are out of the area. But I have been active as a docent in our area at some of the state historical parks. I volunteer currently at 2 different animal shelters, so I am still active in the community with a lot of that.
You also are a photographer.
I am a photographer, a visual artist as well. And I was able to use my photography. Part of the setting for Crow's Rest is actually in Ione. It's the Preston School of Industry is what it was called when it was run as a boys' reformatory, and is locally known as Preston Castle. So I've been involved in documenting the restoration of that. So I have quite a few photos of that. And it's very haunted, it's very spooky, it's a very atmospheric place that it definitely is something that when you go in, you're like, I have to set a story here.
I know, and I've seen some of your photos too, and it's like, oh, that's creepy. What can we write about it?
Yeah.
I love it. Well, let's talk about the book. What is the story about?
So the log line is 16-year-old Avery is determined to reclaim her almost boyfriend from the Fae with the help of the creature who stole his body from the first place. Ooh. So it plays around a little bit with some of the mythology tropes with changelings, which are where a fairy would come and replace a human child with a fairy child. And so this is a little bit different change up of the trope of that. I've also played around a little bit with a lot of young adult novels in particular will have the chosen one, you know, someone who was born and it turns out they're the only one who can, you know, buck the dystopian government or whatever. There's a chosen one. And so I play around a little bit with that. She's not quite a chosen one, and it is more her unique characteristics, not her powers or anything like that, that make her uniquely capable to fulfill her role in the book. So that, I think, was a really interesting way to build a character with the main character of Avery.
Nice. And there's a love interest?
There is a love interest, and that's what kind of makes it a little more complicated because, you know, someone does take over her almost boyfriend's body, and that's who she's interacting with. And she's actually, it's not a spoiler for the story because it's in the back copy, but she's the only one who notices that it's not Daniel, you know, the neighbor boy, that it's behaving differently, and she's the one who figures out that someone has either come and taken his place or, you know, possessed him. Is how it's presented.
So how hard is it to write for young adults as an adult?
The main thing I think is that, especially with a lot of adult novels, the pacing is completely different from a young adult novel. So you are kind of having that paradox of you're looking back at a young adult and your teen experience, but looking at it through your adult eyes and experiences. So that's hard to do. But it's also, the pacing for the novel is completely different. There's not a lot of room for, 5 pages of describing the decor of a room. There's not a lot of room for that. You've really got to get the story moving in a completely different way than like a literary novel that's meant for adults and things. So that's different. There are some adult novelists who have now turned to writing young adult novels, and they do, in a lot of interviews, talk about how they're writing down to kids and things like that. They just had to change the language down to kids, and I don't agree with that at all. Vocabulary, you can certainly challenge a reader no matter what their age is, and if anything, it's so much easier now for them to look up a word than it was, where you're not having to take off the Oxford Dictionary off the shelf. They have an app where they can look up something much quicker. Yeah. So I don't agree with that you're changing the level of the language for a young adult novel at all. There are also boundaries in young adult. There's different, levels of sexual content. There's different levels of language content, and things like that. So this one does have some language in it. It does have some sexual situations in it, but there's certainly not the most edgy one that's out there.
You like the red chair?
Yeah.
Did I say that?
Well, I don't think yours has the little YA symbol on it, though.
No. Oh, you mean in the genre itself?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, they're pretty benign, as far as, well, the ones that I've seen, or at least the ones they make movies out of, they seem very innocent. But I imagine the books are probably a little bit more...
Yeah, the books are a little bit different, and even then, like The Fault in Our Stars was a John Green novel that was made into a movie, last year, I believe it was, that it was released. And that one does have a controversial sex scene in it because, the girl is sick, and that was a really big deal about whether they should have sex in that novel. It's for young adults and things. And so I think it was handled very well in the novel and the book. It's handled in a realistic way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think
realistic is important because, let's face it, they probably know more about these things than we do.
And even within the construct of a fantasy novel, there's a lot of room for reality in there. In particular, this is an urban fantasy, which means it takes place in contemporary times. This is not a sword and sorcery where someone's being transported back in time, or it's not an alternate medieval universe or anything like that. It's taking place in contemporary times. So her voice is very contemporary. Her relationship with her family is very contemporary, and so there's a lot of reality that creeps in, even into a fantasy novel.
Well, that's a good segue into the question that I have for you, and that is, how did you get involved in fantasy? What was the draw?
I think I definitely read a lot of fantasy as a kid. I started reading that probably in junior high school and was always reading above my grade level, and so read a lot of the classic fantasy and science fiction that my brothers had in their libraries and things. I would, kind of take those books off and read them. And so I definitely have read it from the time I was a child. When I first started writing for what I wanted to do for publication, I was still in high school, and at that time I was trying to write science fiction. I really do love reading science fiction, but I've discovered it was not my forte. And then when I started writing again as an adult, I started out with a historical fiction that had kind of a ghost story element in it. But it still was very serious fiction, and if you spend very much time around me, I'm not a terribly serious person. So it took me for a little while to give myself permission to let that humor come out in the book, to let my own voice come out in the book. And for me, fantasy is about possibilities. And I just love the possibilities that you can find even in the ordinary, the real world. And fantasy lets you express that in different ways.
Now, this is fantasy that I'm not familiar with. When you talk about the Fae, on the Paranormal Connection, we really haven't had too many people that come forth and say, hey, let's talk about changelings.
Right.
Okay, so why don't you go into a little bit about the legends and also about the research that you had to do to incorporate this into your story?
Well, like I said, it did help reading a lot of the old folk tales and things like that I was exposed to for the storytelling. But there are a lot of good resources out there that are either books that were written in the 16th, 17th century that were written very seriously about, the fairies and the little folks and things that are around us. And then there's more contemporary versions that were written almost like a field guide or an encyclopedia and brings all the legends and stuff together. For Crow's Rest, I used used both existing mythology and also made up creatures, like the creature who takes over Daniel. It's called a Corbin. And how they usually come into our world is by taking over crows or ravens or things like that. And that, I think, again, is something that plugs into reality, because if you've ever watched crows and ravens, sometimes it's really uncanny about how they can be really intelligent about things. And so I kind of wanted to play around with that, are there sometimes crows that maybe aren't entirely crows? They have some other element within them. So I made up the creatures of Corbin. And then there's another creature called a Kelpie, which is a bog horse. And
now, is a bog horse real, or is that a made-up creature too?
That one, Kelpie, is a mythological creature from Ireland and
Okay.
Iceland, and there's different parts of Europe all have different legends of the Kelpie. They have all different names. When I put one in the book, I chose to use a slightly less familiar name than Niker, because I didn't want people to immediately know what this Kelpie was and things like that. So I played around with that one is an existing mythological creature, but I played around with what he can do in our world and how he exhibits and manifests and things.
How fun.
Yes. And I did get a chance to go to Ireland, England, and Scotland last year. That's the first time I've ever been there. And got to see a lot of the sites where, these mythologies were born. And that was really interesting to me to see how the forests and things have shaped the stories, because their forests, even though we have oak woodlands and everything here, it's still completely different from what their oak woodlands are. And just the mists and things, it's more like our coast here in Northern California than our inland
fascinating.
oak woodlands.
Well, I'm going to get to see for myself pretty soon.
Yeah.
But so while you were there, were you inspired for more work, or did it kind of solidify?
It actually
what
more
you're...
solidified what I was
Okay.
already working with. I did get some footage that I was able to use in the book trailer that I made for Crow's Rest and things like that. So I will continue to use a lot of those images as inspiration for sure. The photographs that I wrote back, over 3,000 images. We spent 7 days in Ireland and 7 days in each place basically, and I actually have only edited about the first 6 days of Ireland, and there's still so many great photos that I need to bring out.
That's great. So what was it like trying to get published this time?
It was definitely a little bit of a different road. After the experience that I had with trying to get an agent for my first book and then trying to get a publisher and things, I had well over 100 rejections between agents and publishers for that first book. So when I wrote the second one, it not only went faster for the actual writing process, but I also had a much clearer vision of what I wanted to do with it. So I had a shorter list of agents that I was going to submit to, and when I ran through those, if I didn't get any takers, then at that point I had a few small presses I was going to submit to, and then even at that point I was looking into self-publishing as well. Didn't really have an issue with that. I had some health issues that came up. I had cancer, so that changed the timeline for me. With the first book,
Yeah.
I was a lot more patient with, it'll happen when I get an agent and everything. And with this one, after that experience, I was just kind of like, I want to do the things that I want to do when I want to do them. So the way I actually ended up with this book offer is I bid on a critique with an editor through this publisher. And once she got to the pages, she immediately was like, wow, this book is really blowing me away. I want to know what your plans are for it. And, I'll let you know now that there's likely an offer coming. And so I did end up, submitting it to some other small presses too, and ended up going with Spencer Hill Press. And they are a really good balance of, they give you input on the cover art. They really work with the editorials very closely. And so I've been very happy with the editor that I'm working with. And at this point, I don't have an agent. I had one for a short time, and we ended up parting ways. And I'm perfectly comfortable without an agent at this point for this series. Once I go back to working on other books and stuff, I may still go the agent route with that. But I've been pretty happy with the way this has turned out so far.
That's wonderful. Let's talk about the cover, because your cover is just so impressive. It draws you in. I mean, you want to know more about this place and who this girl is and about the raven. It's just wonderful artwork.
And this is actually my concept for the cover art. the original mock-ups that they were sending me were very typical of young adult paranormal novels. For young adult paranormal novels, they tend to have a very close-up of a face, and it's often a guy's face. My main character is a girl. I really did not want to have a guy on the book. I actually don't really like to have the main characters pictured at all, but we did compromise with the figure that we have here. So this is some artwork that I found, the background, I found the illustration of the girl. It did have the bird in the artwork, but when we downloaded the high-res version of it, it actually turned out to be a vulture rather than a crow. So then we had to go through and find a raven that we could substitute for it. But I really wanted the figure to be the girl with her eyes closed because I really liked playing with the tension that comes from that. You don't really know, is she closing her eyes and she knows the bird is there and she's purposely being vulnerable and trusting, or is it that she has her eyes closed and doesn't know that the bird is that close to her? So I really liked the tension that that produced with it. I like all the little touches. There's some little tiny white birds. They are kind of in the artwork, and so you're not really sure if those are real or if there's something that maybe she's dreaming with her eyes closed. So I really liked playing around with a lot of those concepts with the artwork. And it was actually at one point that I was going to do the actual cover design for it, but there was such a small window for it when they told me that we had like 10 days to turn in the cover art that I wasn't going to be able to manage that. So there is actually a local cover designer. Her name is Kelly York, and it's X Potions Design. She's here in Sacramento, and she turned it around really quickly. We worked closely together, and it turned out exactly as I was envisioning it. So,
gorgeous.
And then she ended up doing the full cover, so the back of the book actually has another, it's the same artist for the background. And she was able to put those together pretty seamlessly.
Oh, it's just absolutely gorgeous. And you know what? People are going to be drawn, in the bookstores. Their eyes going to just go zooming into this beautiful cover.
And it's really common with middle grade books to do a lot of interior art, but not quite as common with the young adult, but I really pushed for it. So we have interior art for each of the chapter headings. Like for the section breaks, we used crow tracks and things like that. So I think it makes it set apart a little bit. But because I'm a visual artist, I think I wanted to tie that element into it too. And I mentioned earlier, we are working on an illustrated companion to it that's called a Compendium of the Fair Folk. And it basically came about because the main character, Avery, when she's researching on what could possibly be having taken over Daniel, she has research that she goes to, so I made up a Compendium of the Fair Folk, and it's almost a field guide of it, so it kind of has the description of what the creatures are, what they're capable of, what to watch out for, how to protect yourself from them.
How fun.
And stuff. So my publisher really jumped on that. Yeah, so my publisher really jumped on that, and we've got all the illustrations going with it and everything, and
that's great.
that one will be coming out in July, and it'll probably be as an ebook, whereas this is, both an ebook and a paperback.
Wow, I'd like to see, the companion in book form as well.
Yeah, we are actually formatting it so that it can be printed at a later date. I suspect it's one of those things that they want to see how well the book does before they commit to, something that's a bonus material.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to be able to, I'm going to a UtopiaCon in Nashville in the middle of June, and I'd love to have something like that to hand out at the signing. That would be great.
Well, you've got a book launch coming up. Why don't you tell everybody about that?
Okay. Well, my book launch will be on May 16th at the Avid Reader at the Tower here in Sacramento. It's at 2 p.m. And if you can't make that one, there's actually another signing on June 6th at Face in a Book, which is in El Dorado Hills. So that's actually closer to where I live. And at both of those, we will have treats and hopefully a reading, Q&A, signing. And I also have this really killer crow mask that's on my website. I have a profile picture. And so we'll have photo opportunities where you can take pictures with the author with or without her killer crow mask.
Oh, I love it. And I've seen those pictures. They're absolutely wonderful. So you've got the two books. Are you fulfilling your writing urges, and have you got more books in the back of your mind that you're
Well, The
wanting to
Crow's
get
Rest
to?
is intended to be a series. I have 3 books planned right now, but yeah, I do have other books in mind. For one thing, that first book that I wrote, I do want to go back and rewrite it now that I'm a more experienced writer. I can see, some of those first book mistakes that I was making that I want to go back and correct and just streamlining it a lot. That first book, when it first the first draft was 124,000 words when I first finished it, and it ended up being 92,000 when I submitted it. So this one I was a lot more on target when I wrote it, but I would also like to get back into some short fiction. I do have a picture book on submission right now too. I've also written a few picture books, and just hadn't had as much time to submit those because I've been caught up in writing
By
the Crow's
picture
Rest.
book.
Those are the ones you read to children and things like that.
So they're good for little kids. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
the one that I have on
wonderful.
submission right now is actually poetry,
Okay.
children's book.
Did you do the artwork?
No, I did start to do the artwork for one of the other picture book manuscripts that I have, but I don't know if I will follow through with it or not because again, it just takes a lot of time.
So your first book had a ghost. This one has the fairies. Is this the paranormal genre? Is that kind of your niche?
I think that's my comfort zone.
Okay. And what's the story behind that?
I think it's just, again, about always wanting to be about possibilities and wonder and everything. Even, when I was younger, if I was walking in the forest and you see trees that kind of make an archway together, I couldn't resist walking through them just to see if it happens to be a doorway. And, that's just my personality. And I hope I never lose that. I never outgrow it.
Yeah. Well, you have a Celtic background, don't you?
Different, I'm mostly English.
Okay.
Ancestry, and I did actually get my DNA done recently, and it registered a lot more Irish than I was aware of, but they also lump Welsh in with Irish, and we did know about the Welsh side of the family.
Fascinating. Well, with that kind, do you think you'll run out of creatures to?
I don't think so, because what I can't find in the existing mythology I can just make up.
Yeah. So do you like the research as well as the?
Oh, I love
the
research,
writing?
and that's actually kind of a danger zone for me because I can just keep doing it and not actually get into writing the book. And especially with that first book I wrote, it was a historical one set in the 1850s, and so I did a lot of research with that. I have binders full of stuff, and I mean, not all of that makes it in the book, but I think it informs the story so much if the author has it in her head while she's writing it.
Okay. Now, do you read paranormal as well?
I do.
Okay.
And
is that your favorite genre, or do you kind of switch off with other ones?
I do like historical fiction quite a bit,
Okay.
so I still read a lot of that. I do read some romance as well. I don't read quite as much thrillers, and I definitely don't read very much horror because I'm kind of a chicken. So I definitely, in the last 4 years or so, have been reading almost exclusively YA for fiction. I still read a lot of nonfiction, but my husband now jokes that when we go into bookstores, he's like, "Are you ever going to join me in the grown-up section again?" Because I pretty much make a beeline for the young adult section, but you have to read in the
know
market
your
that you're
audience.
writing.
Absolutely.
So, and I enjoy it because of the pacing. It is something that you can, read in a day or two. And
Yeah. Well, we've only got a few minutes left. Why don't you give everybody your information and again, your book launch dates?
So the book launch is at Avid Reader at the Tower in Sacramento on May 16th, 2 p.m. There's another signing at Face in a Book on June 6th, and that one starts at noon. And then I will also be at UtopiaCon, which is in Nashville, Tennessee, and that's the middle of June. I believe it starts June 17th and then goes for like 5-day period. And all of my information can be found on my website, which is angelicarjackson.com. I have blogs and lots of other social media presence, but they're all linked to that one website. I'm also a member of a couple of different group blogs. One is called Operation Awesome, and for writers in particular, that's a really good one because we run these mystery agent contests every month. And so different genres and things, we'll have an agent who picks pitches and then requests material. And I'm also a member of Fearless 15ers, which are all debut authors that are coming out in 2015. So those are middle grade and YA authors. And that has really been a great one because we have kind of a hive mind where we all pool our marketing tips and things like that. So that's another one that's been great to belong to.
That's great. So all your writers out there, check out Angela's website, and if you're interested or you just want to take a peek and see what else she does, that's a great opportunity, a great place to do that.
And the book trailer is on my website as well.
I got to see that. I got to check that out.
The music for it, I wrote that as well. So.
Oh my gosh, you're so talented. Well, we need to give a little bit of information about the Story Connection.
The Story Connection airs the second and fourth Thursday at 9:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Our companion show, Paranormal Connection, airs the first and third Thursdays of each month. Each episode repeats the following Friday at 1:30 p.m. and Saturday at 5:30 a.m. You can watch these programs online at the same airtimes by going to accesssacramento.org and clicking Watch 17, or you can watch us on Comcast Channel 17 in the Sacramento region and on AT&T Channel 99. For information on upcoming shows and previous Story Connection guests, go to storyconnectiontv.blogspot.com. You can contact us at storyconnectiontv@gmail.com, and don't forget, join us on Facebook, become a friend, and become a fan.
Wow. So you not only do you blog every day or once a week or?
I used to blog a lot more regularly, but again, it leaks into your writing time. And plus, I just think that blogs aren't used the same way as they were when they started 5 years ago and things like that. So my blog right now mostly functions as kind of a clearinghouse for the news that's related to Crow's Rest and things like that. And then Operation Awesome is where I tend to blog more about like the craft of writing. And for a while I was doing like query critiques on there. So you could send me your query and I would critique it. And that was a useful service for a lot of writers.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we're out of time, but I wish you so much luck on your book, Angelica. And I know it's, I've read your work. You're phenomenal. So everybody out there, this is going to be a great read for you. And thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us.
Thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Good. And thank you again to my fabulous crew, Lorene and Laura and Ted and Bob, who was here earlier, for coming out and volunteering your time, because we really couldn't do the show without you. So with that, we're going to say goodnight.